October 2006. The leaves in rural Pennsylvania were just beginning to turn. Every morning, a blue pickup truck made its rounds through the undulating hills, past silent farms, and past the small, white schoolhouse on Mine Road. Inside that truck was Charles Carl Roberts, the milkman, a man known for his gentle demeanor, a man who, to all appearances, led an ordinary life. Yet for months leading up to that autumn, those close to him had observed a subtle shift, a growing distance in his eyes, even when he smiled. And then, in the week before October 2nd, a sudden, inexplicable lightness, a newfound cheerfulness that seemed to settle over him like a shroud. No one understood what it truly signified. No one knew the finality hidden behind that smile dot in the heart of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, that now lies an empty field. No markers, no memorials, just grass, silence, and wind. A landscape erased. Yet some believe that certain scars on the land refuse to fade, that the memory of certain horrors is too profound to be entirely swept away, even by forgiveness. From where are you watching today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Today, we uncover the harrowing events that unfolded when the facade of peace shattered in nickel mines. In the serene landscape of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, there lies a swath of land now indistinguishable from the surrounding fields. It is a quiet place, marked by nothing but the tall, whispering grass and the ceaseless murmuring breath of the wind. No polished stone, no wrought iron fence, no solemn plaque interrupts its natural expanse. The Amish, with their profound and deeply held beliefs, construct no memorials to their dead. They hold fast to the conviction that life endures beyond earthly bounds, that the power of forgiveness far outweighs the cold permanence of stone. Yet, for those who possess the somber knowledge of its past, a precise location remains indelibly etched into the memory of the earth itself. This unassuming parcel of ground, once the site of the West Nickel Mine School, absorbed a volume of innocent blood so immense, so utterly devastating, that it mandated a complete and deliberate erasure from the visible landscape. Before it was meticulously obliterated, before the silence that now blankets it became so absolute, this very ground held the chilling narrative of events that unfolded in the autumn of 2006. October of that year saw the rolling hills of rural Pennsylvania don their most vibrant autumnal cloak. A rich tapestry of amber, russet, and burnished gold unfurled beneath a sky that hinted at the crisp, clean chill of approaching winter. Here, nestled amongst fertile farmlands, crisscrossed by unpaved lanes, the Amish community of nickel mines continued its existence in a rhythm largely undisturbed by the hurried, dissonant cadence of the modern world. Their lives unfolded with a deliberate, anachronistic grace, untouched by the insistent hum of electricity, the urgent rush of automobiles, or the ceaseless clamor of contemporary communication. Horse-drawn buggies, dark silhouettes against the morning light, moved with stately purpose along dusty roads. The air often carried the scent of freshly turned earth and the distant, rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Children learned their lessons in small, single-room schoolhouses, structures that mirrored the elegant simplicity of their homes and meeting places. One such edifice, unassuming in its plain white siding, with broad, multi-paned windows that invited the morning light, stood along Mine Road. A modest bell, perched atop its roof, summoned young scholars to their daily studies. Within its sun-dappled interior, 26 children, their ages spanning from a tender 6 to a more seasoned 13, absorbed lessons in arithmetic, practiced their reading, and were deeply immersed in the sacred teachings of their faith. Their voices, lifted in unison during hymns, occasionally drifted through the open windows, a gentle, melodious counterpoint to the rustling leaves outside. This particular schoolhouse was a deeply familiar landmark to Charles Carl Roberts. His blue pickup truck, a utilitarian splash of color against the pastoral greens and browns, traversed Mine Road with unwavering regularity. It was a constant, almost expected fixture against the backdrop of the changing seasons. He was the milkman, a steady, unassuming presence who collected the fresh, creamy produce from the local Amish farms. It was, by all accounts, a tranquil occupation, performed by a man widely perceived as tranquil himself. A quiet man in a quiet community, he seemed to blend seamlessly into the measured, unhurried rhythm of the region. His interactions were typically brief, polite, his demeanor agreeable. The sight of his truck pulling away, its bed laden with the day's harvest, was a common, utterly unremarkable event. It was a picture of routine, of predictable normalcy. Charles Roberts was 32 years old. His hair was kept short, his face often framed by a pair of modest glasses. His expression, to casual observers, typically bore a gentle quality, almost a quiet diffidence. He was a husband to Marie, his high school sweetheart, and a father to 3 young children. Their home, a comfortable, unpretentious structure in nearby Georgetown, lay merely a few miles from nickel mines. Their existence was, on its surface, a quintessential American life, the casual intimacy of weekend barbecues, the familiar sight of children waiting patiently at the bus stop, the pleasant, almost ritualistic exchanges with neighbors over shared fences. Yet beneath this carefully constructed veneer of ordinariness, a subtle, insidious discord had begun to resonate. An invisible fracture, imperceptible to most, was steadily widening in the months preceding that fateful autumn. A disquieting change had been observed in Charles Roberts. It was not a sudden transformation, but a gradual, almost imperceptible shift. His colleagues at the milk processing plant noted a growing detachment, a subtle but persistent retreat into a less communicative version of himself. He would often stare, unseeing, into the middle distance, his gaze unfocused even during the bustle of loading and unloading. The inherent warmth that once flickered in his eyes, even when he offered a practiced smile, appeared to recede further with each passing week, leaving behind a subtle vacancy that was unsettling to those who had known him longer. He would offer terse, almost monosyllabic answers to casual questions, his usual polite interest replaced by a quiet, brooding absorption. A heavy silence often accompanied him, a stark contrast to the easy banter of his fellow drivers. They exchanged glances, a shared, unspoken unease passing between them, but none could articulate the exact nature of the change. Then, inexplicably, in the week leading up to October 2nd, the shadow that seemed to cling to him began to lift. A strange, almost unnatural lightness seemed to settle over him, an uncharacteristic surge of cheerfulness. He was observed humming quietly to himself in the truck, a rare sound in recent months. His interactions became marginally more engaging, though still carrying an underlying quality of surface-level performance. Neighbors, accustomed to his reserved nature, remarked upon his seemingly improved spirits, his sudden ease. They saw a man emerging from a period of quiet struggle, seemingly regaining his footing. But the observers, though well-meaning and discerning in their own way, could not perceive the true, chilling nature of this transformation. It was not a recovery. It was the eerie, placid calm of a mind that had already arrived at a terrible, immutable resolution. The sudden influx of peace was not a sign of healing, but the chilling tranquility of profound, internal resignation. It was the quiet before the storm, a deceptive calm that masked the terrible decision already made. 9 years prior, an indelible sorrow had pierced Charles Roberts's life, carving a wound that refused to close. His newborn daughter, fragile and new, had lived for a mere 20 minutes before succumbing to an unforgiving fate. For any parent, such a loss unleashes a devastating, soul-crushing grief. For Charles, however, this tragedy seemed to cleave open something dark and volatile within him, a deep fissure through which bitterness could seep. He carried the burden of this grief visibly, a subtle slump in his shoulders, a newfound gravity to his movements. Over the years, this profound sorrow had not healed. Instead, it had festered, like a wound denied air, decaying into something putrid and profoundly violent. In the chilling fragments of his self-penned declarations documents that would later be discovered and scrutinized, Charles confessed that since his daughter's death, he had been filled with so much hate. A venomous, all-consuming rage, he wrote, directed both at himself for his perceived failures, and at a God he believed had cruelly abandoned him. This inner turmoil, though largely unspoken, manifested in his increasing isolation, a silent wall erected between himself and those who once knew his former self. And then there were the dreams. disturbing, intrusive nocturnal visitations that clawed him from sleep in the middle of the night, leaving him soaked in a cold sweat. Marie would occasionally stir beside him, sensing his restless agitation, the sudden, sharp intake of breath as he startled awake. He often rose and moved through the quiet house, a shadowy figure visible in the dim hallway light, unable to find solace or return to undisturbed sleep. His descriptions, later found in his writings, alluded to unsettling fragmented images, young girls, vague recollections of sexual violence, and chilling references to acts he claimed to have committed 2 decades prior when he was only 12 years old. He meticulously documented these nocturnal terrors, assigning them a dark, pervasive truth. Subsequent investigations would ultimately discredit these claims. The alleged victims, when questioned, consistently and vehemently denied any such abuse. Yet Charles appeared to cling to these fabricated narratives with a desperate tenacity. Or perhaps he simply willed himself to believe them, for they provided, in his twisted logic, a perverse form of justification, a dark, self-serving rationale for the unspeakable actions he was on the precipice of executing. He moved through his days with an increasing internal intensity, a quiet obsessiveness that was both disturbing and unreadable to those around him. Monday, October 2nd, 2006. The morning dawned clear and cool, painted with the pale, hopeful light of early autumn. The air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves. Charles Roberts rose early, as was his custom, joining his family for breakfast. The sounds of clinking silverware, the gentle murmur of morning conversation, and the rich aroma of coffee filled the kitchen. He participated in the usual routine, a picture of ordinary familial normalcy, carefully maintaining his composure. His movements were deliberate, measured, betraying no hint of the storm raging beneath his placid exterior. At precisely 8:45 a.m., he and Marie walked their 3 children to the bus stop, a daily ritual performed countless times before. They exchanged customary goodbyes, Marie's hand resting briefly on his arm as their children boarded the yellow school bus. She witnessed nothing out of the ordinary in her husband's demeanor, saw no flicker of the terror he harbored. Why would she? It was simply another couple seeing their children off to school. Another unremarkable morning in a series of many. But Charles, in that moment, bore the chilling, absolute knowledge that he would never see them again. His gaze, as his children ascended the bus steps, lingered a moment longer than usual, a subtle, almost imperceptible pause, before he turned away. The invisible weight of a decision, long made in the shadowed, corrupted corners of his mind, seemed to settle into a chilling, absolute calm. He offered Marie a final, almost imperceptible nod, then walked towards his blue pickup truck. The familiar vehicle now seemed to hum with an unspoken, terrifying cargo. The engine turned over with a low growl, and the truck pulled away from the curb, heading down the quiet, tree-lined road. It did not turn towards his usual milk route, towards the farms where he was a known, genial presence. Instead, it continued straight, towards an unimaginable destination, carrying its driver towards an act that would shatter the illusion of peace in an entire community. The morning, so ordinary in its unfolding, was a meticulously orchestrated prelude to a horror that would soon explode, tearing apart the very fabric of innocent lives. The stillness of the morning air seemed to hold its breath, a premonition of the violence about to be unleashed. The fateful morning of October 2nd, 2006, unfolded in a grim duality, playing out simultaneously in 2 distinct locations, each unaware of the other's escalating horror. Marie Roberts returned home from her Bible study group shortly before 11 o'clock. The quiet house, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to hold a heavy, unnatural stillness. She hung her coat on its accustomed hook by the door, the mundane action feeling alien in the suddenly oppressive silence. As she stepped into the kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the window fell upon the oak table, illuminating 4 stark white envelopes laid out with deliberate precision. For a moment she paused, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. Mail was usually placed in a basket by the entrance. Her eyes scanned the envelopes. One bore her name, written in Charles's familiar hand. The others were addressed, each in turn, to their 3 children. A cold, sudden dread, sharp and insistent, pierced through the lingering warmth of her mourning. Her hands, usually steady, began to tremble as she reached for the envelope marked with her name. The paper felt insubstantial, yet it held an unbearable weight. She tore it open, the crisp sound loud in the unnerving quiet. The words within were a torrent of despair, a chaotic jumble of self-loathing, distorted guilt, and a raw, almost incoherent darkness she had never imagined resided within the man with whom she shared her life. His handwriting, usually neat, now seemed to twist and contort, reflecting the turmoil of his mind. Phrases about hate, paying for sins, and dreams blurred into a terrifying confession of a tormented soul. The air seemed to grow thick around her, making it difficult to draw a full breath. Her fingers tightened around the flimsy paper, crumpling it slightly. A wave of dizziness washed over her, the room spinning momentarily. The silence of the house, once merely quiet, now amplified the chilling implications of the words, pressing down on her with an unbearable weight out just as the full, horrifying reality of the notes began to sink its poisoned tendrils into her mind. Her cell phone, resting on the counter, vibrated. The sudden, jarring ring-tone ripped through the suffocating silence, making her flinch. She stared at the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was Charles. A deep, primal instinct urged her not to answer, to let the terrifying message go to voicemail. But another, more insistent compulsion, born of a desperate need to understand, to somehow stop the inevitable, forced her hand. She pressed the green button. His voice, when it came through, was strange. It was tight with an unfamiliar tension, distant, yet chillingly clear in its dreadful pronouncements. He spoke of dark fantasies, of the things he needed to do, of a terrible payment he believed was due. His tone was not one of panic, but of a chilling, almost detached resolve, tinged with a raw, guttural desperation. Marie found herself unable to process the words, her mind reeling, struggling to form any coherent response. The sheer impossibility of what she was hearing locked her tongue, paralyzing her. She could only listen, a helpless observer to the unraveling of everything she knew. And then, without warning, the line went dead. The click echoed in the suddenly renewed silence, a final, definitive severing. She stood alone in her kitchen, the crumpled notes in one hand, the dead phone in the other, utterly isolated by the terrifying knowledge that now consumed her. Meanwhile, 20 miles away, a different kind of horror was beginning its slow, insidious creep at the West Nickel Mine School. The crisp morning air, still carrying the faint, sweet scent of burning leaves, was filled with the familiar, cheerful sounds of children. It was 10:25 a.m., and the 26 Amish students had just returned from their morning recess. Their laughter, the scuff of their shoes on the packed earth of the schoolyard, and their lively chatter as they re-entered the single-room classroom were the typical, reassuring sounds of childhood. Emma May Zook, their young teacher, was in the process of guiding them back to their small wooden desks, preparing for the next lesson. The room, filled with the simple energy of young minds, vibrated with a peaceful, predictable routine. Suddenly, the children paused. A low rumble, the distinct sound of a vehicle, broke the quiet rhythm of the school day. It was an unusual sound for this time of morning, a disruption to the usual calm. Through the broad, sun-drenched windows, they saw a blue pickup truck. It was backing slowly, deliberately, towards the front door of the schoolhouse. A few of the children recognized it immediately. It was the milkman, Charles Roberts. They exchanged curious glances, wondering why he was here, outside his usual delivery schedule. Charles Roberts emerged from the truck. He entered the classroom, his lips stretched into a strained, almost unnatural smile that did not quite reach his eyes. His gaze flitted around the room, avoiding direct contact with anyone. His voice, when he spoke, was strangely muted, almost a mumble. He asked if anyone had seen a hitchpin, claiming to have lost one somewhere on the road. The children, innocent and accustomed to helping adults, replied that they had not. He nodded curtly, his forced smile never wavering, and then exited the room, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. Emma May Zook felt a sudden, sharp jolt of unease. The man was familiar, a regular presence, but his demeanor was subtly wrong. The lack of direct eye contact, the murmured words, the unusual timing of his visit, all coalesced into a deep, visceral distrust. The flimsy excuse of a lost hitchpin felt hollow, like a poorly constructed facade. Her internal alarm bells, subtle at first, began to clang with a growing insistence. She exchanged a quick, worried glance with her mother, who was visiting the school that morning. An unspoken question passed between them, a shared sense of foreboding. Less than a minute later, the door creaked open once more. Charles Roberts stood in the doorway, no longer attempting to smile. In his hand, held with a chilling, steady grip, was a Springfield 9mm pistol. The dark metal glinted menacingly in the morning light that streamed through the windows, reflecting off its polished surface. The children, sensing an immediate and profound shift in the atmosphere, froze. Their youthful chatter ceased abruptly, replaced by a sudden, collective silence, thick with dawning terror. Emma May Zook pushed her chair back with a scraping sound, the blood draining from her face as she comprehended the horrifying reality unfolding before her. Her eyes, wide with disbelief and raw fear, fixated on the weapon. Charles's voice, now devoid of any pretense of friendliness, was calm, unnervingly so. "Boys," he said, his words cutting through the heavy silence, "help me load some things." He gestured vaguely towards his pickup truck outside. The boys, trained from their earliest years to obey adults, moved slowly, hesitantly. Their faces, usually open and trusting, were now clouded with confusion and a nascent, growing fear. Their small bodies, propelled by ingrained obedience, began to shuffle towards the door, their eyes still darting towards the gleaming pistol dot. It was now or never. Emma May Zook and her mother exchanged one final desperate look. A silent, urgent communication passed between them. With a sudden burst of courage born of sheer terror, they turned and bolted. Their long, simple dresses, usually a hindrance, now billowed around them as they sprinted for the door. Their hurried footsteps pounded on the wooden floor, raising a faint cloud of dust. They burst out into the cool autumn air, their bodies propelled by a desperate, instinctual drive for survival, aiming for the nearest farm. Charles saw them. His carefully maintained composure fractured. His face contorted, a mask of controlled calm, giving way to a raw, violent frustration. "Stop them!" He bellowed at one of the boys, his voice a sudden guttural roar that shattered the classroom's fragile quiet. "If they get away, I'll kill everyone." His words, a chilling, unambiguous threat, hung in the air, revealing the true, monstrous intention behind his actions. But it was too late. The teacher and her mother, fueled by adrenaline, were already gaining ground, their figures rapidly receding across the fields towards the distant farmhouse. The boys, paralyzed by fear and the stark reality of the threat, stood motionless. Emma May and her mother, gasping for breath, their lungs burning, finally reached the farm of Amish Smoker. They stumbled through the yard, their faces streaked with tears and dirt, their simple bonnets askew. School, armed man, children. Emma May choked out, her voice ragged with terror, barely forming coherent words. Amish Smoker, a man of quiet fortitude, took one look at their terrified faces and the wild panic in their eyes. He understood immediately. Without a moment's hesitation, he strode inside and reached for his phone, dialing the emergency number with a swift, decisive motion. It was 10:36 a.m. The first desperate plea for help had been sent. Back at the school, Charles Roberts was systematically transforming the familiar classroom into a chamber of unspeakable intent. The boys, wide-eyed and trembling, their initial confusion now solidifying into palpable fear, obeyed his commands. They carried item after item from the bed of his blue pickup truck, each object a grotesque tool in his unfolding plan. Wooden planks, rough and splintered, were brought in, followed by heavy chains that clanked softly as they were dragged across the floor. A bag of sharp nails, a taser, a shotgun, and various coils of electrical cable were added to the growing pile of implements. Tools from his toolbox, hammers, saws, pliers, were arrayed with disturbing precision. Then came the items that made the children's young stomachs lurch with a dawning, inarticulate dread. A thick wooden board, long and sturdy, fitted with several menacing metal hooks of the type used to restrain livestock, was carried in. Its purpose, though unspoken, seemed horrifyingly clear. And finally, a nondescript canvas bag. Its contents, later discovered, would paint an even more chilling picture of Charles's depravity. Changes of clothing, rolls of toilet paper, slender candles, bundles of plastic zip ties, and a tube of personal lubricant. Each item, mundane in itself, was now imbued with a sinister, perverse significance. Charles, working with a methodical, almost practiced efficiency, began to use the wooden planks to barricade the main door. The resounding thuds of wood against wood echoed through the small room, each blow a stark, percussive countdown to an unknown horror. The sounds of metal clanging softly as the chains were laid out, the splintering of wood as nails were driven home, all combined to create an auditory landscape of confinement and escalating terror. The children, huddled together, began to cry softly, their muffled sobs barely audible above the sounds of construction. The small, familiar classroom, once a sanctuary of learning, was being systematically sealed, transformed into a makeshift prison. The sounds of the barricade, each thud, each clang, served as an agonizing prelude to the unspeakable horror it was about to unfold, effectively sealing the fate of the innocents trapped within. Inside the West Nickel Mine School, the grim transformation of the classroom into a chamber of impending terror continued. Charles Roberts, his face now devoid of any pretense, turned from the newly barricaded door to face the terrified children. His Springfield 9mm pistol, a cold extension of his will, remained clutched in his hand. The air in the small room, thick with the smell of sawdust and fear, seemed to grow heavy, each breath a struggle. The children, frozen in various stages of disbelief and growing panic, watched his every move. His voice, sharp and unyielding, cut through the suffocating silence. "Boys, get out," he commanded, his gaze sweeping over the young faces. "And take the mothers with babies. And the pregnant woman. Get out now." The words were delivered with a chilling finality, an undeniable decree. For a split second, the children hesitated, their minds struggling to process the sudden, terrifying shift in reality. Then, as if a dam had broken, a surge of motion erupted. 15 boys, propelled by a primal instinct for escape, scrambled towards the now barricaded door, their small bodies jostling each other in their haste. Amidst the chaos, 3 mothers, clutching their infants, moved with surprising speed, their faces etched with a desperate, protective fear. A pregnant woman, her steps more ponderous but equally urgent, followed them. Her hand pressed instinctively to her swelling abdomen. In the ensuing confusion, a 9-year-old girl named Emma Fisher, her small frame made agile by sheer terror, managed to slip through the throng. Her eyes darted, searching for an opening, a path to freedom. With a burst of desperate energy, she squeezed past the larger boys and mothers, narrowly avoiding Charles's gaze, and darted out the door, her simple dress a blur against the bright light of the autumn morning. She did not look back. Her older sister, however, remained behind, caught within the tightening snare of the classroom. The exodus was swift, leaving behind a stark and horrifying reality. 10 girls remained. Their ages ranged from 6 to 13 years. They stood huddled together, small figures in their plain dresses and white bonnets, their faces pale, their eyes wide and brimming with unshed tears. The air around them crackled with an unspoken dread. Charles Roberts surveyed the remaining children, a chilling expression that held something between desire, hatred, and utter despair flickering across his features. His earlier pronouncements about his self-loathing and distorted guilt seemed to manifest in this horrifying selectivity. "This deliberate choice. Line up against the blackboard," he ordered, his voice now different. It was tenser, edged with a strange, unnerving excitement that sent a fresh wave of terror through the room. The girls, their movements stiff and uncoordinated, obeyed. They shuffled forward, their backs pressing against the slate surface where a half-erased math lesson still lingered. The numbers, symbols of order and logic, now seemed profoundly out of place in the burgeoning chaos. Charles began to tie them. He moved methodically, almost clinically, like someone who had rehearsed this dreadful act 1,000 times in his fractured mind. Plastic zip ties, pulled from the canvas bag, were cinched tightly around their small ankles, binding their legs together. Then their delicate hands were forced behind their backs, the plastic biting into their skin. He worked with a disturbing precision, ignoring the soft whimpers that escaped the youngest, the muted cries of the older girls. Some began to pray, their hushed pleas rising in the Pennsylvania Dutch dialect they had learned from birth, a desperate invocation for divine intervention in their incomprehensible torment. Charles, however, appeared utterly impervious, his movements unhesitating, his focus absolute. The circulation in their bound limbs was cut off, a dull ache already beginning to throb, a physical manifestation of their captivity. Outside, the first patrol car from the state police arrived at 10:42 a.m. A mere 7 minutes after Amos Smoker's urgent call to 911, the officer, driving with practiced speed, saw the blue pickup truck parked haphazardly by the schoolhouse entrance. He saw the rough wooden planks clearly visible, nailed across the front door, a crude but unmistakable barricade. The scene instantly clicked into horrifying focus. This was not a simple accident or a lost hitchpin. This was a hostage situation. The police cruiser stopped some distance from the school, its siren blessedly silent. The officer grabbed his loudspeaker, a static hiss preceding his words. "Throw your weapons down and come out with your hands up." He broadcast, his voice echoing across the quiet fields, cutting through the natural sounds of the rural morning. The urgency in his tone was undeniable. From within the sealed schoolhouse, Charles Roberts's response was immediate and chillingly clear. His voice, ragged with a sudden wild fury, screamed back, "Get out of here. Get out or I'll kill them all." The threat, raw and unfiltered, confirmed the worst fears of the officers. The peaceful Amish school, a symbol of innocence and tradition, had become a perilous crucible. The minutes that followed stretched into an agonizing eternity, each tick of the clock a torment. More police cruisers arrived, their flashing lights casting an eerie, pulsating glow over the landscape. Ambulances, their sirens muted, and fire trucks, their ladders folded, began to line the quiet road, their presence a stark reminder of the escalating emergency. A crowd slowly started to gather at the perimeter, a silent, horrified assemblage. Amish neighbors, drawn by the unsettling commotion, stood with bowed heads, their faces a mixture of fear and profound sorrow. Paramedics and firefighters, their expressions grim, waited in grim readiness. All were impotent, mere observers to the horror unfolding within the small white building, all united in a silent vigil of desperate hope and fervent prayer. A sense of helplessness was pervasive, a heavy blanket that smothered all present. One Amish man, displaying an extraordinary and almost reckless courage, attempted to approach the school from the rear. Accompanied by his 2 large, loyal dogs, he moved stealthily through the tall grass, his figure low to the ground. He knelt beside a side window, attempting to peer through the glass, straining to discern any details of the unfolding terror. But when the first police car inadvertently drove past without stopping, the man had to abandon his covert mission, sprinting towards the road, waving his arms frantically to alert the officer and make him turn back. After that, any attempt to approach the school unseen became impossible. The perimeter was now secure, albeit from a distance, with watchful eyes on every angle. Inside the school, time operated on a different, more terrifying scale. For the 10 girls bound and huddled against the blackboard, each second was an eternity of terror. The faint sounds of the gathering commotion outside, the distant shouts, the muted crackle of police radios were a vague, unsettling backdrop to their immediate, visceral fear. Charles Roberts paced the narrow aisle between the desks, his movements erratic, almost frenzied. He mumbled to himself, a low, guttural stream of incoherent words that offered no solace, only deepened the dread. At times he would pause, his gaze falling upon the girls, his expression an inscrutable mixture of warring emotions, something that seemed like sick desire, coupled with an overwhelming self-hatred and a profound, bottomless despair. His grip on the pistol never wavered. At 10:55 a.m., Charles retrieved his cell phone. With an unnerving calm, he made 2 calls. The first was to Marie, his wife. His voice, though still tinged with that unsettling tension, now carried a strange, almost confessional quality. He recounted his disturbing dreams, his dark fantasies, the unspeakable actions he was now committing or intended to commit. Marie, still reeling from the suicide notes, was in a state of profound shock, unable to form coherent words, her mind fractured by the sheer weight of her husband's revelations. The second call was to 911. "Get the police out of here," he demanded, his voice trembling slightly but firm with renewed resolve. "Get them out in 2 seconds, or I'll start killing." The operator, trained to de-escalate, attempted to engage him. "Sir, please, we can." Charles cut her off, his voice rising in volume, raw with a desperate urgency. 2 seconds. He roared, and then, without waiting for a response, he disconnected the call. The line went dead, leaving the operator with a chilling silence and the horrifying knowledge of the threat. And then, in that suffocating silence, something occurred that investigators would later describe as one of the most profoundly heroic acts they had ever witnessed. 2 sisters, Marion Fisher, 13 years old, and Barbara Fisher, 11 years old, began to speak. Their voices were low, tremulous, but held an astonishing, unwavering firmness. They were bound, vulnerable, facing an unimaginable terror. Yet they found within themselves a strength that transcended their fear. "If you're going to shoot someone," Marion said, her voice barely a whisper, yet clear in the hushed room, "shoot me first." Her eyes, wide and filled with an almost unbearable courage, fixed on Charles. "No," Barbara interrupted, her voice equally small but resolute. "Shoot me. Let my sister live." She struggled against her restraints, trying to step forward, to place herself between her sister and the man with the gun. "Let me go first," Marion insisted again, her voice gaining a surprising conviction. "Let the others live." These were children, barely more than infants, bargaining for their own deaths, pleading to be executed first in the desperate, flickering hope that their sacrifice might buy precious moments, might offer an impossible window for the police to save the others. Charles Roberts looked at them, his gaze unblinking. For a fleeting moment, something shifted across his distorted features. Confusion? Remorse? A flicker of recognition of the profound innocence he was about to desecrate. It was too quick, too ephemeral to be certain. The silence in the room stretched, taut and agonizing, pregnant with a terrifying, unbearable suspense. The clock ticked on, oblivious to the desperate, heroic sacrifice being offered. At precisely 11:07 a.m., the chilling tableau within the West Nickel Mine School reached its horrific climax. Charles Carl Roberts ceased his erratic pacing. His gaze, distant and unsettling, settled upon the 10 girls, bound and huddled in silent terror against the cold blackboard. The air in the classroom, thick with the scent of fear and unspoken prayers, seemed to draw inward, holding its breath in anticipation. Without a single word, without any visible hesitation that might betray lingering humanity, he raised the shotgun. The metallic click of the safety being disengaged, faint yet piercing, resonated in the profound stillness, a prelude to devastation. The weapon's cold, dark barrel leveled, unwavering, at the huddle of defenseless children. His grip was firm, almost mechanical, utterly devoid of any tremor of conscience. The first shot detonated within the confined space like a clap of unnatural thunder, violent and deafening. The sound ripped through the air, vibrating through the floorboards and rattling the glass in the remaining windows. Instantly, violent splintering accompanied the blast as the panes tore apart, sending sharp, jagged shards scattering across the room, glittering deceptively in the pale morning light. A collective, piercing scream, raw and utterly primal, tore from the throats of the children. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, echoing off the high ceiling, seeming to cling to the very walls of the schoolhouse. Then came the second shot, a heavy, sickening boom, followed swiftly by the third, a relentless, horrifying percussion that seemed to shake the very foundations of the small building. Plaster dust, dislodged by the concussive force, rained down from the ceiling like a grim, premature snow. The acrid, metallic smell of gunpowder, sharp and suffocating, swiftly permeated the air, mingling irrevocably with the children's cries, After the initial devastating volley from the shotgun, the sound shifted, becoming sharper, more rapid. The heavy, booming reports were replaced by the crisp, staccato cracks of the pistol. One shot, then another, a chilling mechanical rhythm that spoke of a cold, focused intent. Each discharge tore through the quiet morning, cutting through the fading echoes of screams, a series of precise, deliberate acts of violence. The cries, initially unified in their raw agony, became fractured, punctuated by choked gasps and whimpers, some abruptly and horrifyingly silenced. The air grew thick with the smell of scorched metal and fresh blood. 13 shots in total, a brutal combination of shotgun blasts and pistol fire, were unleashed into the claustrophobic space. It was a methodical annihilation, an execution in plain sight. Then, with an abruptness as shocking as the violence itself, the firing ceased. A profound, unnatural silence descended upon the schoolhouse, a heavy, suffocating blanket that seemed to swallow every sound, every lingering echo of the horror. Outside, the police officers, their weapons drawn, their bodies tensed, had braced themselves for a prolonged and desperate firefight. The sudden cessation of noise sent a fresh, chilling wave of dread through their ranks. It was an ominous quiet, far more unsettling than the preceding chaos, a quiet that screamed of finality. A rapid decision was made. The order to breach was given, raw and urgent. Within moments, the first officers, their faces grim and determined, charged the barricaded door. The wooden planks, hastily nailed, splintered under the force of their entry, giving way with a crash of tortured timber and tearing nails. They surged into the school, weapons held high, their training overriding the immediate shock of the scene. What confronted them inside would forever scar their memories, a vision of absolute, unmitigated horror that no amount of preparation could mitigate. The scene was an unspeakable tableau of devastation. Blood, it was everywhere. It soaked into the small wooden desks, staining the pages of open textbooks. It was splattered across the simple white-painted chairs, smeared onto the pristine walls, a macabre artwork of violence. Dark pools had collected on the worn wooden floorboards, seeping into the cracks. Shards of broken glass glittered underfoot, intermingled with the dark. Empty shells of spent cartridges, reflecting the dim, filtered light that struggled to penetrate the remaining windows. The blackboard, where a mathematics lesson still faintly lingered, a series of innocent equations, symbols of order and logic, was marred with dark, viscous patterns. A chilling contrast between the school's purpose and its current state. And then, the girls. Small, innocent forms, dressed in their plain, traditional attire, lay scattered in impossible, unnatural angles. Some were still cruelly bound by the plastic zip ties that had held them captive, their small wrists and ankles chafed and marked. Blood trickled from head wounds, soaked through their simple dresses over chest and back injuries, staining the fabric dark, seeping into the wooden floorboards beneath them. Their young faces, once filled with curiosity and the boundless innocence of childhood, were now pale and still, devoid of life. Charles Roberts himself lay on the floor amidst the carnage, the pistol still clutched in his hand, a chilling testament to his final act. He had placed the barrel against his own temple and pulled the trigger. Half of his head had been obliterated. His eyes, what remained of them, were open, unseeing, fixed on the ceiling. A disturbing final image. Janice Ballinger, the deputy coroner for Lancaster County, was among the first forensic personnel to enter the scene once it had been meticulously declared safe. A seasoned professional with years of experience, she had witnessed countless scenes of human tragedy and violence throughout her career. Yet nothing in her extensive professional experience, no prior horror she had confronted, could have adequately prepared her for the raw, unadulterated devastation that met her eyes within the West Nickel Mine School. She moved through the room with a practiced, but visibly shaken determination, her gaze sweeping over the scene, taking in every terrible detail. The stench of blood and gunpowder hung heavy in the air. A sickening cocktail. Later, in her official testimony, her voice, usually steady, clinical, and dispassionate, was described by those present as trembling, breaking with an emotion that transcended her professional detachment. She recounted, with palpable difficulty, the pervasive destruction she had witnessed. There wasn't a desk, there wasn't a chair in the entire room that wasn't covered in blood or glass. She stated, her words slow and heavy. There were bullet holes everywhere. Everywhere. In the walls. In the ceiling. In the floor. She then began the grim task of attempting to document the individual injuries on one of the small, lifeless bodies. When she reached a count of 12 shotgun pellet holes on a single, tiny frame, her composure fractured completely. She had to stop, her hand trembling, unable to continue. She quietly requested another officer to take over the inventory, confessing that she simply could not proceed. The sheer, impossible brutality of the attack. The incomprehensible number of wounds inflicted upon such a small, vulnerable child was beyond her capacity to bear, eroding the stoicism she had built over years of confronting death. Among the immediate fatalities discovered at the scene were 3 young girls. Naomi Rose Ebersol, a vibrant 7-year-old, her life extinguished in an instant. Marion Fisher, 13 years old, the brave girl who had selflessly offered herself, first to save the others, was found in a tragic testament to her extraordinary courage. Her sacrifice, born of a love that defied comprehension, had been met with the ultimate cruelty. Anna Mae Stoltzfus, 12 years old, her small body gravely injured, was rushed by ambulance to Lancaster General Hospital, her life clinging to a thread. Despite the desperate, frantic efforts of the medical staff, she was ultimately pronounced dead upon arrival. Her fight, valiant as it was, could not overcome the wounds. There was nothing more that could be done to mend her shattered form. The other surviving girls, gravely wounded and fighting for every breath, were swiftly transported by a fleet of ambulances and helicopters to specialized pediatric trauma centers, their futures hanging precariously in the balance. Among them were 2 sisters, Lena and Mary Liz Miller, aged 7 and 9 respectively. Their small bodies, broken but resilient, fought for their lives with astonishing tenacity for hours. They were quickly hooked to a maze of life support machines, their tiny chests rising and falling to the rhythm of mechanical breaths. Doctors worked tirelessly, their faces etched with grim determination, attempting to stabilize their critical conditions, to repair the damage inflicted. But the injuries were too severe, the damage too extensive, the internal systems too profoundly compromised. In the agonizing, pre-dawn hours of October 3rd, after a night of fervent, tearful prayer and excruciating deliberation, their Amish parents were forced to confront the most painful decision any parent could ever face. With heavy hearts, trembling hands, and tear-streaked faces, they made the devastating, almost unfathomable choice to withdraw life support. Lena and Mary Liz, inseparable in life, passed away within moments of each other, their young lives tragically cut short. Their deaths elevated the grim toll, solidifying the massacre's devastating and enduring impact on their grieving community. Yet, another fate, equally heartbreaking in its own way, awaited 6-year-old Rosanna King. She was the youngest among the victims that day, a tiny wisp of a child whose innocence had been brutally violated. What Charles Roberts inflicted upon her was so exceptionally brutal, so profoundly damaging to her delicate system, that medical professionals expressed bewildered amazement that she had survived at all. Her brain had sustained catastrophic injury, a permanent wound that stole her future and reshaped her existence. Rosanna would never walk again, her limbs rendered inert. She would never speak another word, her voice silenced forever. She would never again be able to feed herself, requiring constant care. She remained trapped in a fragile state, suspended between life and death, her small body broken, yet her spirit, in some miraculous, incomprehensible way, endured. She smiled when her family visited, a simple, pure gesture that hinted at a lingering awareness. Her eyes, though unfocused, seemed to recognize their voices, finding a flicker of light and comfort in her endless twilight. Rosanna King survived for 18 long, silent years in this broken state. Her devoted parents, exhibiting an almost unimaginable depth of love, commitment, and spiritual fortitude, cared for her at home, providing constant, unwavering attention, a daily testament to their boundless love. Then, On September 3rd, 2024, just 1 month shy of the 18th anniversary of the massacre, her fragile heart finally gave out. Rosanna King became the 6th fatal victim of Charles Roberts, a death that cast an impossibly long shadow, spanning nearly 2 decades. Her passing, so far removed in time from the initial violence, yet directly caused by it, solidified the tragic dimension of the event. A wound that continued to bleed, year after year, refusing to truly close. The horror of that day had not ended in 2006. For some, it merely extended, a prolonged agony that found its conclusion only with the final breath. Here, then, is the part of the story that confounded the world, a narrative thread that tangled news headlines and sparked furious debates across continents, while the blood of their daughters still stained the floorboards of the schoolhouse, while helicopters still whisked agonized children to distant hospitals. The Amish community of nickel mines performed an act that seemed, to many, utterly impossible. They forgave. This was not a delayed act, born of time and reflection. It was not weeks later, nor even days. It unfolded mere hours after the unspeakable horror. On the very day of the massacre, as the autumn air still carried the scent of gunpowder and the echoes of terrified screams, an Amish grandfather was observed speaking to his surviving grandchildren. His voice, though quiet, carried a profound, unshakable conviction. He was heard to say, "We must not think evil of this man." His words, delivered with a calm fortitude, seemed to float above the raw grief, a testament to a faith that transcended immediate, justifiable rage, hours after the relentless gunfire had ceased. An Amish neighbor, his face etched with sorrow, but his resolve firm, made his way to the home of Charles Roberts. He found Marie, the killer's widow, adrift in a haze of shock, the chilling suicide notes still scattered across her kitchen table. Her 3 children, bewildered and frightened, struggled to comprehend why police cars now converged on their peaceful home. The Amish man, with no trace of accusation or anger in his demeanor, simply embraced Marie, his arms wrapped around her in a gesture of profound, unconditional acceptance. He spoke softly, conveying the community's forgiveness, extending an invitation for her and her children to remain welcome within their midst, an offer of solidarity in the face of unimaginable tragedy. Later, another member of the Amish community sought out Charles Roberts' father. The elder Roberts, a retired police officer, now had to grapple with the devastating reality that the son he had raised had become a mass murderer of children. The Amish man found him consumed by inconsolable grief, his body shaking with profound sorrow and bewildered despair. Without a word, the Amish man simply held Charles' father in his arms. For a full hour, he offered silent, unwavering comfort, a physical manifestation of empathy and shared suffering that transcended the horrific chasm that had opened between their families. There were no words, no explanations offered, only the profound, binding embrace of human compassion. The extent of this impossible forgiveness continued to manifest in ways that bewildered a world hungry for vengeance and retribution. 30 members of the Amish community attended the funeral of Charles Roberts, the man who had bound their daughters, who had shot them at point-blank range, who had transformed a schoolhouse into a killing field, received a silent, solemn procession of those he had wronged. Their presence was a living sermon, a stark declaration of their faith. And when the 5 girls Naomi, Marion, Anna Mae, Lena, and Mary Liz were laid to rest in their small, hand-dug graves, in simple wooden caskets too small for the lives they contained, Mary Roberts, the widow of the killer, was not only permitted, but actively invited to one of the funerals. She stood amongst the very people whose families her husband had irrevocably shattered, a figure of profound grief and incomprehensible grace. And in that sacred, sorrowful gathering, they embraced her. The Amish community went further still. They established a charitable fund, but its purpose extended beyond immediate relief for the victims' families. A portion of the funds was specifically allocated for Charles Roberts' family, a testament to their unwavering commitment to support Marie and her 3 children, ensuring they would not face financial ruin in the wake of her husband's monstrous actions. The world watched, astonished. Critics from across the globe decried the act as wrong, as a forgiveness of the unforgivable, a naive denial of the very existence of evil. Yet, the Amish remained impervious to the world's clamor and judgment. For them, forgiveness was not an act of forgetting or condoning. It was a conscious, arduous refusal to allow hatred to fester and rot their own souls, as it had so tragically consumed Charles Roberts. It was a shield against the darkness, a defiant assertion of light. 10 days after the massacre, on October 12, 2006, the West Nickel Mine School was systematically and completely demolished. It was an act of profound, deliberate erasure. Every blood-stained plank of wood, every shard of broken glass, every bullet casing embedded in the walls, everything that bore witness to the horror was carefully removed, loaded onto trucks, and transported away to be utterly destroyed. The ground was then meticulously leveled. Fresh grass seed was sown. In a matter of mere weeks, it became impossible to discern that a school had ever stood on that spot. The Amish did not desire a memorial. They did not wish for morbid tourists, drawn by tragedy, to desecrate the ground. They wanted no permanent physical reminder of the place where such unmitigated evil had taken root. They sought to reclaim the land, to return it to its pristine, unburdened state. 6 months later, on April 2, 2007, precisely half a year after the massacre, a new school opened its doors. It was named the New Hope School, a powerful declaration of resilient faith and enduring spirit. It was built near the original site, but intentionally designed to be different. The layout of the floor plan was altered. Windows were placed in new locations. Nothing within its construction was permitted to evoke the memory of the old school. Life, in its quiet, determined way, continued. Because for the Amish, despite all trials, it always does. But there are certain things that cannot be erased with lumber and new topsoil. There are wounds that run deeper than any bulldozer can reach, memories that no amount of silence can suppress. The survivors of that horrific day carried scars that would never fully close. Sarah Ann Stoltzfus, though she bravely returned to school, forever bore the mark of the violence, the vision in her left eye permanently dimmed. Barbie Fisher, Marion's younger sister, returned to playing softball, a testament to her resilient spirit, but only after undergoing multiple surgeries on her shattered shoulder. These girls and the others were strong. They faced their injuries and their trauma with a fortitude that defied their tender years. Yet, it was quietly acknowledged, in the intimate whispers of the community, that when the day's work was done and the profound silence fell upon their simple homes, the nightmares came. Nightmares where a man with glasses and a murmuring voice would once again enter through a door, bringing with him the terror of that autumn morning dot. And then, there is the empty field. If one were to journey there today, out of respect for the community's profound desire for privacy, it is strongly urged that one does not, they would find only a silent pasture. Green grass in the warmth of summer, a pristine blanket of snow in winter. The wind whispers through the empty land, a constant, mournful sigh. No plaque, no memorial, no lingering sign exists to indicate that here, almost 20 years ago, something truly unspeakable took place. The erasure is, on the surface, complete. Yet, there are those who live nearby, people rooted deeply in the land and its old ways, who speak of things that are typically only murmured in hushed tones, never spoken aloud in the bright, unforgiving light of day. It is said that on certain crisp October mornings, when the mist is thick enough to obscure the distant trees, and the air hangs heavy with a pre-winter chill, you can sometimes hear a bell, faint, distant, as if carried on the wind from a great distance. The sound of a school bell, ringing clearly, though there is no bell there anymore. There is nothing there at all. It is said that sometimes, late at night, drivers passing along Mine Road catch fleeting glimpses of lights where no lights should be. A soft, yellowish glow, like that of candles, flickering across the empty field. But when they slow their vehicles, or stop to look more closely, the lights vanish, leaving only the profound darkness of the moonless countryside. And there are those who swear, though they speak of it only amongst themselves, never to outsiders, that the horses, the strong, placid Amish horses that pull their buggies and work their fields, refuse to pass near the exact location. They rear back, whinnying, their eyes rolling white with an ancient, unreasoning fear, gazing intently at the empty field as if perceiving something that remains invisible to human eyes. They shy away, their powerful bodies trembling, as if confronted by an unseen presence. And then there are those who swear, though they whisper it only in the deep quiet of their homes. Never to strangers that on very still nights. When the wind is just right, you can hear voices. The soft, clear voices of children, singing hymns in Pennsylvania Dutch, the very same songs they sang every morning before lessons began, before the man with the pistol arrived. Perhaps these are merely stories. Perhaps they are what the collective way a community, a people, attempt to process evil in its purest, most incomprehensible form. Perhaps they are simply the wind and the play of imagination, and the universal human need to find meaning, however unsettling, where no discernible meaning exists. Or perhaps, just perhaps, there are wounds so profound, so deeply etched into the very fabric of existence, that the earth itself remembers. That the soil, once steeped in violated innocence, retains echoes of what transpired. That certain horrors are simply too vast, too absolute, to be entirely erased, even when we meticulously demolish the buildings, plant new grass, and valiantly endeavor to move forward. The field is empty. But it is not at peace, not it never will be. And when the wind blows across that silent earth, stirring the dust and lifting the dry autumn leaves, it is difficult not to feel that something remains profoundly wrong in that place. Something invisible, yet undeniable. A palpable presence. A heavy, lingering weight in the air. A spiritual pall that refuses to dissipate. The kind of weight that remains when genuine. Unadulterated evil touches the world and leaves its indelible, permanent mark. Charles Carl Roberts had sought to destroy. He had intended to make children pay for his own twisted demons. He had hoped to transform his personal agony into a collective massacre, to unleash his hatred upon the innocent. But he failed in one fundamental thing. He did not succeed in breaking the spirit of that community. The forgiveness the Amish offered was not a weakness, as many outsiders perceived. It was, in fact, the most powerful and enduring weapon imaginable against the crushing darkness he represented. It was a defiant act of grace, a shield against the corrosion of vengeance. Still, the 5 girls, 6, if one counts Rosanna's prolonged, silent suffering and eventual passing, will never return home. Their parents will never again hear their laughter ringing through the fields. Their sisters and brothers grew up with empty spaces at the dinner table, with photographs that captured moments that could never be recreated. And in the silent field where it all happened, the earth remembers it always will, because some horrors are simply too strong to be forgotten, even by God. The echoes of those 13 shots faded not into silence, but into a stark, horrifying stillness. Within the West Nickel Mine School, absolute devastation unfolded, a scene of impossible grief that marked the end of innocence for so many. Charles Roberts lay among the carnage he created, his final act a grim punctuation to his rampage. But what followed was not the world's expected chorus of rage. Instead, an act of bewildering grace emerged from the heart of the Amish community, a forgiveness so immediate, so profound, it defied all understanding. From the grandfather's quiet admonition to his grandchildren, to the neighbor's embrace of Marie Roberts, to the Amish man's silent comfort for the killer's father, and the presence at the murderer's funeral itself, a stark spiritual defiance of hatred. Even the establishment of a fund to support Roberts's grieving family underscored a commitment to healing that transcended earthly justice. The West Nickel Mine School was razed, every blood-stained piece of its structure removed, the ground leveled and sown with grass. New Hope School rose in its place, a symbol of resilience, distinct in its design, a testament to life moving forward. Yet certain scars endure beyond the reach of bulldozers and new beginnings. The physical wounds carried by survivors like Sarah Ann and Barbara, the profound 18-year-long silent battle of Rosanna King, and the quieter internal battles fought against the nightmares that still visit them. These wounds prove that some events burrow too deep to ever truly vanish, and so we are left with the empty field, a silent stretch of earth where the school once stood. The whispers persist, Tales of a distant bell on foggy October mornings, of faint, flickering lights seen late at night, and of Amish horses, their eyes wide with unseen terror, refusing to pass by that hallowed ground. These are not merely stories. They are the collective memory of a landscape that absorbed an unspeakable horror, a testament to the indelible mark genuine evil can leave behind. Charles Carl Roberts sought to destroy, to break spirits, to turn grief into an instrument of his own twisted rage. Yet, in their impossible forgiveness, the Amish community found a strength that ultimately transcended his destructive intent. They demonstrated that while bodies may fall and buildings may crumble, the spirit can remain unbroken. However, the field remains. It remembers. It always will. For some horrors are too profound to be truly forgotten, even when forgiveness casts its longest shadow. What does such profound forgiveness mean to you, in the face of an act so utterly devoid of mercy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The lingering echoes of forgotten tragedies and the depths of human resilience intrigue you. Consider exploring another, unsettling account from our archives. For more tales whispered from the edges of history and the heart of darkness. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to Host of Silence. Your support helps us continue to uncover these profound narratives.